Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. We've seen plenty of touchdowns in the over 60-year history of the New England Patriots. We've seen game-winning touchdowns. We've seen garbage time touchdowns, passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, special teams touchdowns, defensive touchdowns. Safe to say, there's been a lot of times, especially in recent years, that the Patriots have found themselves in the end zone one way or another. But of all the touchdowns in the history of the franchise, and trust me, there are a ton of them, there's one that stands out for a very particular reason. There was one touchdown that was an unbelievably heroic play. It won his team the game with practically no time left, and sealed the deal in somewhat surprising fashion. However, it came at a high cost. Because of his selflessness, he wound up costing himself his entire career. He suffered an injury so bad on the play that he was never really able to recover. In a 1974 game against the Minnesota Vikings, New England Patriots tight end Bob Windsor had an unbelievable touchdown that, considering the circumstances of what happened because of it, might be the most bittersweet touchdown in the history of the Patriots franchise. And this is the story behind that play. Before I talk about the touchdown itself, we need some context to understand the player in question and how the Patriots were playing entering that critical game. In 1966, the San Francisco 49ers spent a second-round draft pick on tight end Bob Windsor. And around the turn of the decade, he was one of the better tight ends in the league. During the 1969 season, he had 49 receptions for 597 yards. Both of these numbers ranked second in the league amongst all tight ends, only trailing Washington tight end Jerry Smith. However, there was one small problem for Windsor. Despite some solid seasons in San Francisco, he was getting outplayed by another man on the roster. In the first round of the 1969 NFL Draft, the 49ers spent a pick on tight end Ted Wallach. I made a video about him, so if you want to learn more about that tight end, then click the card in the upper right corner. And in 1971, Wallach made the Pro Bowl after posting 52 receptions for 664 yards and 5 touchdowns, becoming one of John Brody's favorite targets to throw to. With Windsor expendable, a deal was struck with the New England Patriots where Windsor would go across the country and play for them in exchange for a first-round pick in the 1974 NFL Draft. San Francisco got a high draft pick, and New England got a solid tight end who could fill a big need for the team and could be a good option for newly acquired first overall pick Jim Plunkett to throw to. It seemed like a win-win trade on paper. And during those first 2 seasons in New England, Windsor was a pretty solid tight end. Whether it warranted a first-round pick, I would lean towards no on that, but he was a very solid player nonetheless. In 1972, he had 33 receptions, which ranked 7th in the league amongst all tight ends. And he followed that up in 1973 with 4 receiving touchdowns, which was the most of his career and also ranked 7th in the league amongst all tight ends. There were a lot of really good tight ends in the AFC in the early part of the 1970s, from Riley Odoms to Rich Castor to Bob Trumpy. And while I wouldn't put Windsor in that first tier, he was pretty solidly in the second tier of guys. The bad news for Windsor was that although he was having some success on the field, his team wasn't having any of the same luck. That would all change in 1974. In the early part of the 1970s, the New England Patriots were a complete laughingstock throughout the National Football League. Some of the highlights of the team's ineptitude include the following. The team was renamed from the Boston Patriots to the Bay State Patriots, only for the team to backtrack on that name change after realizing that the team's initials would have been BS. You had Cleve Rush start a game in a motel room and end it as the team's head coach. You had a fan who was pulled from the stands to play in a game. And you had Phil Bankston become the interim head coach in 1972, even though he was working for the Chargers at the time and would return to the Chargers immediately after. And I'm only scratching the surface on this. The whole organization back then was a mess. And considering the fact that they had gone 27-70-1 over the last 7 years, winning just 28% of their games, I'm sure a lot of people did not have any hope for the Patriots entering the 1974 season. But under head coach Chuck Fairbanks, that would change. When 1974 began, the tone was set right away after the Patriots shocked everyone by defeating the Miami Dolphins 34-24 in Week 1. Keep in mind that this was a Miami team that had won 3 straight AFC titles and 2 straight Super Bowls, and had not only won their last 4 meetings against New England, but destroyed them in the process. Then the Patriots beat the New York Giants 28-20, and followed that up with a 20-14 victory over the Los Angeles Rams. After beating the Baltimore Colts 42-3 and the New York Jets 24-0, out of nowhere, the Patriots were 5-0, and to the surprise of everyone, were one of the best teams in the NFL. Even though the Pats lost their next game in a 30-28 defeat to the Buffalo Bills, entering the 7th game of the season, they were in a pretty good spot. They were 5-1, tied with the Bills and the Raiders for the best record in the AFC. If the season ended after 6 weeks, they would be in the postseason as a wild card. The Pats had scored 176 points through 6 weeks, which was not just the top total in the AFC, but the top total in the NFL. They had allowed just 91 points, which was just 2 points shy of the Oakland Raiders for the best total in the conference. And their point differential of plus 85 was the best in the NFL, and is even more impressive when you consider the fact that no other team in the AFC had a differential above 60. Their Week 7 meeting was a big game on the road against the Minnesota Vikings, and it was during this game that some bittersweet history would be made. October 27, 1974. It's Week 7, and we've got what might be the biggest game of the entire NFL season at this point between the Patriots and the Vikings. This is a big game for both teams, as both of these teams find themselves squarely in the playoff picture. For Minnesota, they're 5-1 and are 2 games atop the NFC Central. They have a chance to blow this division wide open. Chicago and Green Bay both lost earlier in the afternoon, so a win by the Vikings puts them 3 up with 7 to play, giving them an almost insurmountable lead. As for the Patriots, even though they're 5-1, they don't have the same kind of breathing room, especially with Buffalo at 5-1 atop the division, and Miami and Cincinnati at 4-2 right in the thick of things for the wild card. By halftime, the Patriots are leading 10-0. Minnesota's offense, which was the second best in the NFC, had nothing going. This was a team that 2 weeks before dropped 51 points on the Houston Oilers and scored 30 in the first half alone. But in this one, nothing. A 37-yard field goal by John Smith and a 21-yard touchdown pass by Jim Plunkett to Steve Schubert gave New England its 10-0 lead. Fun fact, this was the first touchdown of Schubert's career, and the only one that he would score while he was a member of the Patriots. So you're witnessing a small bit of NFL history with this play right here. However, when the fourth quarter rolled around, the Vikings showed why they were one of the best teams in the league, and why they were representing the NFC at the previous Super Bowl. A 2-yard touchdown run by Chuck Foreman cut it to a 10-7 game. And then with 90 seconds left, Fran Tarkenton punched it in from 3 yards out to give the Vikings their first lead of the game. Minnesota led it 14-10. And even though Tarkenton infamously got ejected from the game, which feels weird to say about a quarterback, it probably wasn't going to matter at all. The Vikings were likely never going to have to touch the ball on offense again. It all was going to come down to Jim Plunkett and his cast of characters to try and stun the Minnesota faithful. What followed was the most bittersweet touchdown in the history of the franchise. Somehow, Plunkett was able to get the Patriots into scoring position. After Plunkett found Randy Vitala on a 55-yard pass, the Patriots were in the red zone. All of a sudden, there was hope and a sense of belief that they wouldn't choke this one away. With 8 seconds left and no timeouts, the Pats had time for 2 more plays if they went to the sideline or the end zone, but just 1 play if they were going to the middle of the field. If the play in the middle did not go to the end zone, then that would have been the ball game, and it would have been an absolutely heartbreaking defeat for the underdogs. So how did this game end? Plunkett found tight end Bob Windsor. Initially, Windsor was short. He caught the pass at either the 2-yard line or the 3-yard line, well short of the end zone. And with multiple Viking defenders near him, it seemed impossible that he was actually going to cross the plane. But he somehow did. Thanks to his heroic effort, the Patriots had stunned the Vikings 17-14. As Windsor said afterwards, a couple of guys on the Vikings were spitting at me, yelling, "You didn't get in." I just pointed to the scoreboard and said, that's all that counts. The good news was that the Patriots had just won a stunning game, and were 6-1 through 7, somehow sitting as one of the best teams in the league at the midway point. However, that touchdown came at a costly price. What made that touchdown even more remarkable was that after Windsor got hit the first time, he tore his right knee, shredding his ligaments in the process. Somehow, he continued to plow through, but Windsor said afterwards that as soon as the first guy hit him, his leg went, and he knew it and could feel the pain. If he didn't continue to fight through, there's a solid chance that Windsor bounces back from the injury. Even if it might not be in 1974, he has a few years left afterwards. But because he insisted on fighting through and not being denied a touchdown, even though Windsor won the battle, at the end of the day, he lost the war. After that iconic touchdown, everyone had nothing but praise for Windsor, his heroics, and his ability to fight through adversity and fight through the pain. Offensive lineman Bob Adams said that Windsor was like a wounded warrior who knew what he had to do, and he did it. Head coach Chuck Fairbanks said, "What can I say about it? The guy just made one hell of an individual effort." And when the team got back to Logan Airport, they were greeted by a ton of fans, who cheered the loudest when Windsor was wheeled out. I'm not sure how many fans realized the severity of the injury on that play, but Windsor's career would never be the same. Windsor missed the entire 1974 season, and even though he came back in 1975, he was not even close to the same guy that he was in his prime. The 1975 season was arguably the worst of his entire career. He had just 6 receptions, which was the fewest he'd ever had in a season with the Patriots. He had just 57 receiving yards, which was the fewest he ever had in a season with the Patriots. He had 0 touchdowns, which was the first time with the Patriots he was ever held out of the end zone. And he only averaged 9.5 yards per reception, which was the worst total of his entire career, including his time in San Francisco. And before the 1976 season started, he retore his cartilage and was forced into retirement. This meant that the touchdown he had against Minnesota was the last touchdown he ever scored in his career. On one hand, this touchdown was a tragic moment. Here was a man literally laying it all out on the line for a touchdown that didn't even matter in the grand scheme of things, as the Patriots would collapse in the second half of the 1974 season and finish at 7-7, missing the postseason. And it cost him his entire career. On the other hand, there's a reason we're still talking about this play nearly half a century later, and why many Pats fans who were around at the time call it one of the best plays in the history of the franchise. This play was heroic. This play was courageous. Any adjective you want to use to describe this play, that's what it was. Yes, Bob Windsor lost his career because of this, but he earned his spot in Patriots history, and is remembered by some as a legend because of it. And for that, this might just be the most bittersweet touchdown in the history of the Patriots franchise. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Monday and Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping with the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.